If you're ready to unlock more better days, to take control of your health, to push past your limits and unleash your full potential, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Bettle. For over 2 decades, I've worked with elite athletes and high performers, helping them optimize their bodies, strengthen their minds, and recover from setbacks. Now I'm bringing that expertise to you through the Vitality Collective podcast. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the science, strategies, and real-world solutions you can apply right away. Whether it's enhancing your physical performance, avoiding or recovering from injury, sharpening your mental edge, or simply feeling your best every single day. With insights from top experts and thought leaders, this podcast is designed to help you take action, feel better, and live the life that you deserve. Welcome to the Vitality Collective podcast, where every day is vital. Today we have the privilege of hosting Dr. Keith Witt. Dr. Witt is a licensed psychologist, teacher, and author who has lived and worked in Santa Barbara since 1973. He's conducted over 75,000 therapy sessions and published 10 books, including Loving Completely, Shadow Light, and Integral Mindfulness. In presentations and classes around the US and internationally, Keith has explored love, therapy, interpersonal relationships, and development from multiple perspectives, weaving neuroscience, integral theory, wisdom traditions, and numerous forms of psychotherapy into a coherent cosmology of love and healing. Keith and his wife Becky have been together since 1973, and they have 2 grown children, Zoe and Ethan. Over the years, Keith's interests have included martial arts, tap dancing, surfing, tennis, and singing and songwriting with his band, Head Gasket. In today's episode, Keith and I explore the essence of vitality and its role in cultivating high performance and emotional well-being. You'll discover the transformative power of productive self-awareness, the role of relationships in healing, and how trauma can fuel personal growth. Keith shares actionable insights into shifting from burnout-prone mindsets to sustainable motivation systems, why finding the right therapist is key to self-transformation, and how our unique shadow self influences our perceptions and actions. Whether you're navigating challenges or looking to expand your potential, this episode is packed with wisdom to help you thrive. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to this episode of the Vitality Collective podcast, where I'm very excited to be joined by my guest, Dr. Keith Witt. Now, Keith's been my therapist for 15 years, right around there, Keith? Is that right?
Around there.
Yeah, and so there's not much ground we haven't covered. And if there's one thing that I know, there is no session with Keith without a cup of tea. So we're both armed with our cups of tea, and we are ready to go. Keith, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
This is a really, for me, underrated area of the longevity movement. And one of the reasons we chose vitality over longevity, because as I look at vitality, I think about it as the experiences that we have of our body, our life, our relationships, that being so guided by how we feel in our body, how we feel in connection to the world. And that was really stark going through my career as a high performer. Going through getting a PhD, working through the different levels of sport, all the way up to the highest levels of professional sport, and always felt like I was chasing something and not quite getting there. I'll be really happy when I achieve this. I'll feel fulfilled. I'll feel like I've grown into myself when I achieve this, and never quite got there. And that's where we started working on the inside world.
Yes.
And that has been where I'm changing my view of vitality, how I feel. And so that's really where I would love to start, on the development of that inner world. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. Well, let's start with vitality. Well, one of the turning points in my career happened in the late 90s. When I encountered Ken Wilber's integral system, which is an epistemology that's basically a meta theory. It organizes other theories. And you're always looking for organizing principles. And I had my organizing principles at that particular point. And I was shocked to find a system that took me further. And I won't go into it in detail. If you internalize that system, if you see the world through the lens of people at different developmental levels, people in different states of consciousness, different types of people, if you're looking at things objectively and subjectively, individually and collectively, mm-hmm. if you see that world, your world changes. And vitality has to do with states of consciousness. States of consciousness are very physical. They arise out of our physical sensation. Our nervous system is always relating to the world, taking in hundreds of thousands of inputs. And then our adaptive unconscious, which I call our shadow self, decides for us through anticipation and what we need, and sends us information via emotions, impulses, and stories. And they come up out of our unconscious constantly. And our conscious self, the ego that we're going to talk about in just a little bit, doesn't really have access to that until after half a second to a second and a half after they've been generated.
Interesting.
And in psychotherapy, over the last 100 years, the first 100 years really, since Freud up until the 60s and 70s, people really emphasized kind of there's a conscious self monitoring and dealing with that stuff. Everybody had different language for it. The language that I use is drawn a lot from interpersonal neurobiology and neuroscience. And didn't really realize your physical state really influences that stuff. Case in point, don't get any sleep last night. So first of all, if you didn't sleep at all last night, you're as functionally impaired as if you're legally drunk. All right, so the messages that are coming up are just as contaminated by being so tired as they would be as if you're legally drunk.
Right.
Let's say that you have a sick microbiome, as many people have. Well, your physiological state is going to be uneasy. The body feels that uneasiness, that creates anxiety. And so you read more threat from the environment. And so then the material that comes up is consistent with that sense of threat. Say you're a relaxed, mellow kind of person. The world that you see is a more safe world. Say you're a more angry person. The world that you see is a more irritating and threatening world, and so on. So all these things are affecting us, and especially life energy. So vitality, I love the title of your system. So if we're taking care of our physiological and behavioral and stuff, and emotional and relational systems. All right, if that stuff is dialed in, and we're feeling a sense of health in our body, what that does is it gives us, interestingly, an optimal, accurate view of the world. We're not adding our fears or our excitements or our desires, that kind of stuff. And of course, this goes way back in the wisdom traditions, thousands of years. This is Buddha said all along. What are the Four Noble Truths? Well, life is irritating. By the way, in the Noble Truths, they say dukkha is suffering. What literal translation of the Pali is life is like a squeaky ox cart wheel. It's not life is suffering. It's life is irritating. And and so that's caused by attachment. And attachment then is our emotional relationship to our experience. Mm-hmm. As Buddhism and as the other wisdom traditions all agree, observing that without struggling with it. Mm-hmm. Observing it with radical acceptance leads to liberation. You're still, there's a squeaky ox cart wheel, but it doesn't bother you as much.
And so where does this interpretation start forming? This subconscious nervous system conditioning that's our first responder before the conscious and the ego get involved?
This is the adaptive unconscious. Okay, so in a way, we can see the entire organism as a black box with the brain at the center. So I'm taking in all these inputs from every every experience, not to mention my associations, my history, my predispositions, and so on.
That's sort of what I'm referring to there, like going way back, not just where does it start in the moment, but how do we start developing that from birth?
I'm not going to go into too much detail with this, but it goes back to the first life on this planet. All right. The first prokaryote single-celled life had developed habits of how to stay alive. And the next level of organization, the eukaryote cells with mitochondria, they took those habits and added new habits. Okay, let's fast forward to 5 million years ago when humans came out of the trees and developed the human pair bond, which is the human pair bond, mother, father, kids, in a hierarchical system that's either helping growth hierarchy or dominating a dominator hierarchy. That system is the basis of all human relationships and human social structures. That added an enormous number of drives to all the other drives that had happened,
Right.
which because development is include and transcend. And all those drives continued into our lineage, which goes back in many generations, both energetically and genetically. We're affected by what our grandparents and great grandparents experienced. There's a lot of fascinating research on that these days, epigenetic research and so on, particularly with trauma. And they just demonstrated that there's certain kinds of traumas that will affect your. So all these things are setting us up. Then we're conceived. As soon as the egg and the sperm meet and they're fertilized, a little electrical field comes into existence. And that electrical field will stay alive and grow throughout the life of the organism. I personally think that's a carrier wave for soul. That's our interface with the other world. And our unique psychology now is being shaped by us and by our environment. The state of the mother's emotional state and physical state throughout pregnancy affects the child's psychology and physiology. Mothers that are mellow in the last trimester will have mellower kids, and mothers that are stressed out will have kids that are more alarmed. And then we're born. As soon as we're born, you look into your mother's eyes, and your mother looks in your eyes. Mirror neurons in your brain and her brain start wiring up your brain and your consciousness. Infants are born with only 17% of their neurons hooked up. There are a lot of neurons there, but they're not hooked up. They start getting hooked up metabolically, cardiovascularly, their immune system, their emotional system, emotional self-regulation system, all in harmony with mom. Everything is relationships. And as that happens, around 12 months old, interestingly, a kid recognizes, well, I'm different. There's mom and there's me. That's when kids start feeling shame. There's not enough separate self to feel shame before around 10 months old, 11 months old.
Wow.
And now there's a me that's separate from you. And as that evolves around 2 years old, wow, there's a me that thinks and there's a you that thinks. Now, each step of that developmentally, the child is contributing more to its own development through the interaction with the parent and then through choices. And those choices continue to create more and more power to develop to support our own development. But also, all those things that I mentioned are affecting us, guiding us through our shadow self, through our adaptive unconscious. And to the extent we're aware of them, we can make choices about whether to go with our impulses or not. And we might not have time to go into this in detail, but in general, if human beings are feeling great and socially engaged like this, like you and I, we're pro-social, we're moving forward on the road of life, solving problems. If I feel threatened by you, my nervous system will create a defensive state that separates me from you and starts giving me impulses to protect, attack, defend, something like that. And those states of healthy response and social engagement, those states of being defended, those are two general categories of states that we go in and out of every day.
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent we're aware of them, we can make choices. To the extent we're not aware of them, we're just driven by them.
And so what would be the experience of that in my body to become aware, or maybe I'm unaware? What would I experience in those moments?
So this is where paying a lot of attention to your physiological emotional state is a big deal.
Mm.
And now that's called self-awareness.
Right.
And paying attention to what's going on in my mind and my body and adjusting towards what seems healthier, that's called productive self-awareness.
Right.
And, I'm making a big deal about productive self-awareness here because it's at the center of every single human change system. Mm-hmm. on every level, productive self-awareness. Mm-hmm. Even if you have surgery, you have to decide to go to the surgeon and decide to say yes to the surgery. I mean, it's productive self-awareness. Mm-hmm. So productive self-awareness feels good.
Right.
You feel like you're moving forward. You feel satisfied. You feel secure. If you're with another person, you feel socially engaged like you and I feel now. I feel comfortable with you. You feel comfortable with me. If my nervous system reads threat, it starts protecting me with defensive states. Now that defensive state is an amplified or a numbed emotion, a distorted perspective, a destructive impulse, and diminished capacities for empathy and self-reflection. For instance, I've about a third of my practice over the last 50 years have been couples. No, there is no place where defensive states are easier to see than in a couple. So, some therapists hate working with couples. They'll say, hey, I don't work with couples. I go, wait a minute. We're all relational all the time. Everything is relationships. You might want to reconsider that. But anyway, so a couple comes in and she says, he's always correcting me and pushing me around. And he looks at her and he goes, you're just complaining all the time. It's just all you do is complain. I mean, what the fuck? Okay. At that particular point, she came in and she feels injured and kind of scared of the fact that she can't really connect with him when he's trying to tell her what to do. And so she complains about it. Rather than look at that complaint as a request for intimacy, which it is, he feels it as an assault. And so he gets mad, an amplified emotion. He gets a distorted story. She's a bitch. Okay, that's my story. And I'm being victimized by her. The destructive impulse is to make a point to her about how wrong she is and about how she's always wrong this way, as if that's going to do any good. And then when he's doing that, his brain cuts down on self-observation because it says we're in danger. We don't have time to look at ourselves. And it cuts down on empathy because we don't want to be empathically connected to someone that we might have to do violence to. We might have to fight or flee. Mm. Now, these defensive states a million years ago were superpowers. They were literally superpowers because these reflexes to conflicts, this dominance submission stuff, emotional display before physical display, this kept the hierarchies of the tribe intact. And so they gave them huge advantages over other species. And about 70,000 years ago, there was a famine in Africa, and the tribes that could cooperate more had an advantage.
Right.
And so now that we self-domesticated then, so now people got better at negotiating and stuff. So they'd get mad, but they'd stay and negotiate. And that's where the arguing comes from. Okay. Because we got language, we're mad. So people keep going because they have an intuitive feeling we can get back to feeling okay about each other.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, in the modern age, those reflexes lead to defensive habits that we normalize, like this couple had that I just described. Mm-hmm. That interaction, when I see it, I know I'm not seeing it for the first time. I'm seeing this interaction has happened 10,000 times. All those circuits have been activated and myelinated in their brains 10,000 times. The average amount of time that a couple waits after a problem to come to therapy is 6 years.
Wow.
All right. So there it is. There's the embodiment of that. Mm-hmm. Now, what I want them to do is have productive self-awareness. So I interrupt. I don't interrupt individual people very much.
Right.
But I'll interrupt a couple 60 times in 60 minutes. Right. I interrupt. And I'll say, when you complain to him about, him did that, you're actually wanting more intimacy. Yeah, of course I am. It works better to say I'd like more intimacy than to tell him he's a dominating dick. That's yeah. Well, I do. I want more intimacy. So I tell this guy, she wants to be closer with you, and I think that's what you want too. You want her to feel good about you, right? Yeah. I don't want her giving me all this crap. Well, if you don't want to give her to give you crap, then you need to act in a way that evokes warmth. Mm-hmm. For instance, she complains, you go, I know you're complaining, but you probably want better contact with me right now. You're something else. Yeah, I could do that. Well, try it. I'll try it. Yeah, just tell me something I could do that would make you like me better, essentially. Mm-hmm. You could just say, I'd like you to, be kinder right now rather than something. You go, I can do that. Okay, now you see, now they're socially engaged. Right. They just regulated out of those defensive states into a more mature, more highly developed mode of relating. Mm-hmm. Actually, it's going to make them more intimate. Now, that's easy to see with couples, but we do this all the time in the world. And we also have a reflexive ways of relating to ourselves. And this is now we're coming to ego. Okay. Right. Human beings are the most amazing organism in the known universe in just so many ways. First of all, we are the only ultra social mammalian species. We're ultra social. Our faces are the most expressive faces in the animal kingdom. Our social referencing is ridiculously complex. Mm-hmm. Most of our brain developed for us to relate with each other because the biggest threat to people the last million years hasn't been elephants, it's been people. Right. And so we're related. We can create spaceships. A couple of chimpanzees can't coordinate to pick up a log to get grubs under it. We can build cities, okay? Right. But we're also the most individual, isolated creature in the known universe. Why? As soon as we're self-aware, we realize, even as young as 3 or 4 or 5, there's nobody else in here with me, really. Right. You hear 6 or 7 years going, I'm lonely. They're lonely because they want somebody all the way in, and you can't. Human consciousness is too powerful for that. That's what empathy does. It gives us a little bit of that. It gives us enough of that so that we feel secure. And some people are more secure. Some people feel less secure. Some people have more secure environments. Some people have less secure. Some people have trauma. Some people don't. As all that's happening, this self is developing. The self is developing skills. The self is developing a sense of who I am. Am I this? Am I that? Am I a good boy? Am I a bad boy? Mm-hmm. Am I a good student? Am I a bad student? Am I strong or am I weak? All these things. And this becomes kind of the background hum of who we are. And some of it is great. I'm friendly. I like people. People like me. That's a great one. The kids at school don't like me. One client I had, she was the healthy person. If you're the only healthy person in a family, you grow up thinking you are so messed up. Yeah. You just grow up feeling like you're the crazy one. Okay. Her brother was all separate. Her dad was psychopathic, actually. Her mother was a narcissist. And her mother said, no, your dad's on the school board, so all the teachers hate you. She said that to her. So I'm like, oh my God. I grew up with that. I just grew up, people don't like me, And so, I don't know, 40, 50 years later, she and I are having this conversation. She's a very likable person. But so that conviction that was supported by her family translated into a sense of self, translated into not feeling safe, translated into being hypersensitive to criticism, translated into being not distrustful in intimate relationships. Okay, so that sense of self, that that ego, is getting in the way of development.
Right. And is that how we then start perceiving the world? You know, the way I've always thought of it is that we don't see the world, we perceive it.
That's right. We co-create it.
Yeah. And it runs through all those filters.
Each one of us lives in a universe that we're constantly co-creating. Your universe is unique and my universe is unique. Now, the beauty of this is that we can co-create a pretty wonderful universe. You know, right now, the universe that I'm co-creating, I live in Narnia. That's kind of my universe. My universe, you know, as a kid, I want to go to Narnia. You know, that's not going to work. Actually, that was a pretty good ambition. Because to all intents and purposes, that's the universe that I'm co-creating as we speak and that I live in. And it's pretty accurate. It works. And in that universe, I'm aware of a lot of different stuff, and I have a lot of productive self-awareness. And I want to teach people your universe can be more and more the universe that you want to have. Now, we go through stages of development. You know, what I'm describing is a self-authoring mind. I mean, we start egocentric. Kids are egocentric. It's all about me. And then we get conformist, you know, 8 or 9. I want to conform to the school. And then we get more competitive and rational at 15 or 16, where we want to compete on merit-based hierarchies. And then we get more caring. We don't want to eat meat because, you know, the poor animals, and, you know, we want everybody to be taken care of. And then if we continue to grow, we get to a point where we can see the healthy and unhealthy versions of everything that I just said. And so we can self-author, but at a certain point, if you've self-authored a universe, you're not self-authoring anymore. You're doing something else.
Right.
You're maintaining the different processes of your life, and everything is processes in a way that is harmonious with your values and with your sense of purpose. And then you're open to what the universe and you are co-creating on a moment-to-moment basis. And that's called self-transforming mind. And so knowing that we keep growing through different developmental levels where we have more and more of these new capacities, knowing that never stops. You know, 1950, they thought development stopped at 25.
Wow.
Research is overwhelmingly says, no, that's completely not true. Not even neural development. They say you don't get new brain cells, nerve cells. Not true. You know, you can be 85 years old. You get new perspectives. You're developing new neural networks to solidify those perspectives. And you're developing stem cells in your brain, integrated neurons divide, and the daughter cells create new neural networks. We're doing that till we die. And so that developmental process is increasingly, if we want it to be, guided by us. Now, you notice high performance people know all about training. I mean, it's just training, the foundation, almost the air you breathe as a high performance person is training.
Exactly.
Right. So those principles apply to consciousness. Those principles apply to sexuality. Those principles apply to relationships. Those principles apply to whatever work that you do. Which brings us back to the motivation system. Right. The motivation system, if I'm never doing it good enough, it's never enough. And I have to try harder, is a very effective motivation system for making things happen. It gets you through your PhD. You know.
It sure did.
It's in the big 5 personality system. It's called conscientiousness. Added to, and it's never good enough. But it's never good enough leaves us with this empty sense, this frustrated sense, this sense I'm going to be caught, this sense of I'm a fraud, this sense of I should have done it better. I didn't read all the books for the class, so, you know, I'm just kidding them. You know, it was just a joke. Got that, you know, that kind of stuff. That motivation system, at a certain point, limits you in terms of your personal development and your relational development. Because it's not as much fun to be living with somebody who says, yeah, I'm a worthless piece of shit. You know, well, I don't know. That's not very sexy. I prefer you going, you know, I'm a good man struggling to be a better man. I'm a good woman working to be a better woman. That's attractive.
Mm-hmm.
That lends itself to intimacy better. And so we want to shift our motivation system as we mature to the system of, I'm doing my best to do right. And I'm always open to doing things better and to growing.
That's that's something I've always seen in high performance sport as a big challenge. And I see it now outside sport with other high performers. The theory of what gets you there doesn't necessarily keep you there.
That's right.
You know, I see a lot of that with burnout, where people, they get to a certain level and then burn out and start coming down the other side. I certainly noticed it in myself. It's so difficult, I think, to shift from that mindset, because you then, you start feeling lazy when you're resting, and all these things that actually boost performance at the top level. How do we start transitioning then from a mindset of growth and acceleration like that to sort of a sustaining and, I guess, transcendent sort of mindset?
Well, this is where psychotherapy is so beautiful. I mean, obviously, I'm an enthusiast. I've done psychotherapy. I've written about psychotherapy. I've taught psychotherapy. You know, Ronaldo Nehemiah said once, "If I'm not training, I know somebody else somewhere in the world, one of my competitors, is training."
Mm-hmm.
And so he overtrained. Now, it worked pretty well for him because he won more hurdles than anybody else. But it is at a particular point that system breaks down physically and psychologically.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you make the shift? Well, first of all, recognizing we're ultra social. And so if we're ultra social, we change in relationship. So we find somebody who understands the next level of motivation better than we do. And we develop a safe and caring relationship with that person, as you and I have done.
Mm-hmm.
And then out of that, we go, okay, let's explore what the next developmental level is for me around motivation. Recognizing that the brain doesn't ever give up things that it associates with survival, defenses. The only way that you can shift a defense is by, first of all, accepting that you have it, and then
Mm-hmm.
including and transcending it in a more sophisticated and a larger system. So let's include and transcend all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing is people will come in, so high performers will go, okay, so I want to get rid of this motivation system about never being good enough. If that's a person in me, the never good enough person, I want to execute that person. Help
Right.
me execute that person.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues in the 70s, he was doing like a Gestalt dialogue. A dialogue is where you take a part of yourself, put it in a chair, make it a person, and talk about it, and then be in the chair, go back. So she generated a demon. So he told her to put it in the drawer of his office and then leave. So first of all, he had a demon in his drawer. I don't know. That didn't attract me. But second of all, it was a false hope to her.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what you do with something like that. You do something like that, you go, okay, you're a demon, you're my demon. Okay, got it. And, and all parts of us want us to thrive. So how do you want me to thrive? The way you're trying to get me to thrive is by attacking me and telling me I'm never good enough. Okay, fine. Let's find a better way for you to help me thrive. Let's find a more effective way, one that seems more beautiful, good, and true, and that works better. For instance, let's try doing the best that I can, and always being open to being better works. And you can tell me where I'm making a mistake. But remember, when you tell me I'm making a mistake, just back off and let me go, okay, let me change something to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And then, how do I feel about other people who do that? Do the best that they can, find a mistake or have it being pointed out, and then, I'm going to make an effort to be better. What kind of people do I think they are? Wow, I think they're admirable people. Isn't that interesting? I admire other people doing it, but I have trouble admiring myself doing it.
Mm-hmm.
How interesting is that? So you hold that paradox. You notice it. Because awareness regulates. And you become aware more and more of the irrationality of yours, and also how every once in a while you have these moments of, I'm doing the best I can, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm always open to growth. And I like how that feels, and I like the person that I am doing that.
Yeah.
So there's more and more moments of that, fewer moments of you worthless like that. Okay.
Yeah. This has been
Go on.
this has been my exact experience of that.
Mhm.
Really, really, really dark, negative self-talk for years and years coming as I climbed the ladder in sport. And I see high performers in all realms today. It's one of the biggest things I work on with my one-on-one clients is self-talk, self-compassion.
Self-compassion
Yeah.
is super huge, because if you have self-compassion, then I'm performing because that's who I am and what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like, oh God, you got another game tonight. It's like, oh man, we've got another game tonight.
Mm-hmm.
I am the luckiest guy in the world to be able
Right.
to go out on this whatever, and
Yeah.
do what I'm doing. I'm the luckiest guy in the world to be able to help these other people if you're a coach. I'm the luckiest guy in the world to be able to. And so that shift from being burdened by the responsibilities to feeling liberated.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, I've created a life where I get to do this stuff. I get to meet these challenges. I get to do this. And I want to keep getting better at it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be better at this. I like how I'm doing, but I know I can improve, and I know there's people who can help. So again, inner coaches, inner trainers, inner therapists.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're working at, yes, finding ways of improving, but also what you're working at is shifting into a more mature motivation system. Those mature motivation systems give you vitality.
Right.
They're life enhancing. They don't drain your energy the way that I'm
Right.
never good enough does. They
Right.
actually enhance your energy. And you see this. I see it, the Australian Open is being played right now. I used to be a tennis
Mm-hmm.
player and a martial artist. So the individual activities, it's very easy to see who's winning and losing. I mean, there's no team around.
Right.
I mean, they're dominating, So professional tennis players in the off season, the top 10 players, they hire people who they think know more about strategy, technique, psychology than they do,
Mm-hmm.
develop relationships with them, and try to improve. And then in the matches, in the big points, you see this especially in tennis, because in tennis, there's these huge moments. Some people go, oh, I rise to the occasion in big moments.
Mm-hmm.
That's who I am. Okay.
Right.
And they feel that. I can feel it now as I say it. There's just a joy in that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
This is match point. Oh, and I'm serving. Okay. So their opponents, who also are champions, everybody you see on TV is a champion.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have quite as much as that.
Right.
As the person with the joy.
Right.
That's why the top 3 or 4 people just win all the time. Okay. Because they've had that edge, and they're always looking for more. The top people will change coaches. Yannick Sinner is a good example of that. He made it to number 3 in the world and fired everybody that worked for him and hired a whole new team.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's number 1 in the world. Okay?
Right.
Because they took him as far as they could go, and he figured that was it. Now, from a psychological standpoint, this happens with health and vitality.
Yeah.
It happens with relationships. It happens with sexuality and intimacy. My wife and I have been together 50 years.
Right.
Now, in my opinion, each year with her has been a better year than the year before.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a really happy guy with her as my friend and my lover and solving problems. She just came in and interrupted and all that. So what? Okay, fine, we dealt with it. There's no karma that she incurred or I incurred, because that was just such an awkward moment.
Right.
So that relationship, the quality of that is indescribably pleasurable.
Mm-hmm.
The quality of that love. And whenever a couple comes in, there's a part of me that goes, okay, there's a possibility you guys can experience that if we can just make it there, or even an individual. Because,
Mm-hmm.
the number one thing associated with happiness with people when they did the happiness surveys. They did the NORC study out of Chicago every 4 years. And the number one thing is a primary relationship. After that, relationship with friends.
Right.
And then, business stuff, then physical stuff, spiritual stuff, community stuff. There's the top five. And so that sense of moving in those directions, always developing. And how do we do it? We do it with whatever type of person we are. And we do it through the different states of consciousness that we enter. And we do it through our habitual identification with ourselves and with other people. And then we do it through self-observation, and then reach for something that is a more accurate, more beautiful, good and true thing. I never want people to kid themselves about anything. I want people to be more realistic. We are human beings with superpowers. We co-create unique universes, and everything is relationships, and we can improve any of it. Those are all superpowers. And so I go, I see those superpowers. You have them. Let's utilize them to grow. And when you grow, you're going to change. The self that you are 10 years from now is going to be a different self. You'll feel like the same Jeremy or the same Keith, but I'm not the same Keith that I was.
Right.
My values have matured. Everything about me has matured. And I'm a different guy. And in Integral, we say that the stepping stones that you move forward to developmentally from one worldview to another are actually the tombstones of the previous worldview, which is not exactly accurate because it's include and transcend.
Right.
Those guys are always still there, and they'll show up anytime. Every self that I've ever been can show up at any moment. Life conditions. Life conditions tend to produce worldviews. And if you're in safe, loving life conditions, it tend to produce more safe worldviews.
You've described it to me as once you've reached that next level, you can't then go back to the level before for any amount of time. That version of you is still there, but you don't lose that next level that you had.
No, you don't. And that's how we grow. We have peak experiences of better functioning. There's a great movie called Conclave that I just watched. And the psychology of that movie was just, I don't usually watch a movie all the way through, frankly.
Right.
This is when I watched this all the way through. And in the end, there was one guy who just surrendered to God, surrendered to love, who became the Pope eventually. There's a happy ending. And there were various levels of development that were recognized. There was egocentric, me first. There was competitive worldviews. I want to win. I want to be the Pope. There was narcissistic. I want to be the Pope. And then there was a guy who just completely was surrendered to love, period. And he stood out in that movie like a light in a dark room. And they made him the Pope because you can do anything you want in a movie.
Right.
And I saw levels of development. I saw that happening, and that guy had reached the point, as some people reach, where they're just surrendered. And some people spend an awful lot of their life in that state. The Eckhart Tolles, the Thomas Hubels of the world. That's an experience that they have. The Byron Katie's. That their immediate reaction to anything is compassion and love. Now, they have all the other stuff in them, but once you surrender to compassion and love, it's so powerful that when the other stuff shows up, you automatically regulate it to other things. Embarrassment shows up, anger shows up, that kind of stuff. They all still show up, of course. Defense show up, but they're more easily regulated into this powerful position. So, that's now none of us spend all our time there. None of us spend all our time in horror. We have all those things in us. And psychotherapy, and we're all 100% responsible for dealing with all that stuff. But also we're ultra social. in relationship all the time with the different parts of ourselves and with other people. And we have these superpowers for development. And so high performance is not just one thing, it's all the things connected. And if you commit to yourself to a life of being a seeker, a life of growth, nothing's off limits. Whatever's up is a thing that you focus all your attention on. If it's tooth care, I'm going to have superior tooth care.
Right.
Yeah. That captures all my attention until I've made the step I want to take. If it's better relationship with my son, okay, I'm going to improve that, and so on.
I saw a lot of people that were going through that process in sport, working through the steps, and then you saw certain people reach a certain level, and it was almost like there was a halt to that was almost not enforced by their position and their power that they had accumulated within that world, but it was certainly made, I think, more challenging to continue evolving once they had power within an organization.
Exactly.
What's the mechanism there?
Well, first of all, if you have a system that works, very hard to change it. And whatever was happening when it worked, you want to keep that there. So say one of the things of your system is humiliating somebody who screws up. All right, so say you've had success doing that. Very hard to consider an alternative to humiliating that guy or that woman. Why? Yeah, I kind of have a fear if I change my system, I'm not going to be as effective, particularly in sport. The levels that you've been in sport, the level of competition is just ridiculous. I mean, a coach can have 3 bad games and get fired.
Right.
A good coach. Most of them are gifted, and there's a lot of other moving pieces. And so, the idea that I can continue to get better, it's hard, and it requires a lot of ego strength. One of the people that seem to be really good at it, I'm loosely have information, is Jackson, with the Lakers and with the Bulls. Like Phil Jackson, maybe it was his Buddhist interest. He recognized that consciousness really mattered. So he wanted each person to have increasing self-awareness, and he wanted everybody to develop consciousness of whether the energy of the team was the right energy or not. He wanted everybody to find out, what's my contribution? What's my gift to this system? And then his job as a coach would say, this is your gift. This is how you do it. And this is how you can get better at it. And, he would he wanted to win basketball games. So nobody was trying to make Dennis Rodman into, a paragon of mental health. Okay. Nobody was doing that. It was the exact opposite. He goes out and does this bizarre stuff. You come back and do your Dennis Rodman thing that helps us win. You can go to Las Vegas and hang out with, with all the hookers you want, but, come back here and do what you need to do to make that energy work for us. And somebody else on the team go, well, how come Dennis Rodman gets to do that? Phil's thing was, Dennis Rodman will do it. Dennis Rodman delivers where we need him to deliver. So that you deliver where, you want to do that, you deliver. Right. Now, he also helped people evolve, but he would give different books to different people, just trying to figure out different inputs and so on. And, I think that the superior coaches are like superior trainers. They do that. But again, it's hard. If you've had success and you have some personality kink that isn't particularly successful in general or even useful, even kind, and you associate it with success, scary to give that up. Scary to try something different.
And how often do you think that this sort of seeking mindset is sort of driven by trauma or things that happen earlier in life? Does that play a role?
Always. If you go on my website, there's a book called Trauma into Transcendence. There's actually 4 different stages of working through trauma. And if you haven't gotten to the point where you're wiser and stronger, you haven't gone far enough, in my opinion. Now, a lot of people don't want to go that far. A lot of people just don't want to have the flashbacks anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Fine, we can do that. There's lots of treatments, very effective treatments with that. A lot of people just want to have the states of consciousness that they want, choose states of consciousness that are okay. That's fine. But if you go through all 4 stages, the 4th stage of trauma is just being aware when the trauma learning, trauma and resilience both are memory systems, they're learning systems. So when trauma learning shows up, reflexively, you go, oh, trauma learning, and then you know how to turn it into strength.
And what might that look like?
Well, say you were bullied by your father, okay, or your mother. So say you're bullied by a parent. And so you develop a fear. If you say you're a guy, you're bullied by your mom. Let's try that. So you develop a fear of intimacy with women. Okay? And so you get close with the woman and you get hyperreactive when she gets angry or coercive. She gets a little angry, coercive, you go, bam. And not even realize you feel justified, those destructive perspectives. So that's causes problems in your relationship, obviously. So say you work through that. Say you go, well, I get it now. That bullying energy, when I was little, that was unacceptable to me. And so now what I developed is a lot of power and rage to go against that energy. So that nobody's going to bully me. Okay, fine. It's great to take a stand. I'm not going to let people mess with me. And when something deserves a 2 on the don't mess with me scale and I give it an 8, that extra 6 is coming from me and makes things worse. All right. And also, this person is not, who disagrees with me or who's mad at me or whatever, maybe they're trying to coerce me, maybe not. Let's find out. Always conflict is best resolved into mutual connection and positive feeling and a step forward in every relationship. So you learn how to do that, practice it, so on. But then, your wife comes in and says, hey, I want you to fix this thing for me. And you start to get pissed. Okay. And you go, whoa. And then you go, wait a minute. Of course she's doing this and stuff has to happen. And, Now, the old don't mess with me energy starts, but it gets regulated. If you practice it enough, your unconscious does it for you. It doesn't even rise to consciousness. It's still happening neurologically, interestingly. The defenses still show up. If you practice new behaviors enough, then it rises to the level of consciousness because they're regulated by your unconscious. There's a great research they did with rats, where they made rats scared of this place of a maze with a shock and everything. They do horrible things to rats.
Right.
And then they waited and let the rats extinguish the response. They stopped the shock. The rats went to the place. So then they took the poor little rats out. They took off their frontal cortex. They just took it off surgically, where our regulatory circuits are in all mammals. They put them in and they were scared of that spot again. They didn't really extinguish the fear. The rats had developed a regulatory circuit saying it's a safe place now, and they took that circuit away. That's how we change. And so that's why when someone's developing a dementia, it's called the Jacksonian principle. What they begin to lose are the more sophisticated functions first. They lose humor. They lose intuition. They lose a higher level moral reasoning, because that's how we develop. That's how brains work. That's how human beings and relationships work. And so right circumstances can bring the right response. If it rises to consciousness and we have principles and practices and beliefs, we regulate it. And Alan Shore, one of my favorite interpersonal neurobiology people ever, basically his whole thing is what he calls regulation theory. He says affect regulation, regulating emotion, is basically at the center of everything that
Mm-hmm.
that marks development, everything. And I think that that's true. I think that that's, if you're going to take a central capacity for human thriving, affect regulation would be at the top of the list. Now, I think there's other things on the list, but that would be at the top.
And what would be the mechanism then for that to then feed into the seeking mindset?
Well, first of all, we're all born with some element of self-transcendence. Robert Cloninger did this work. He's a personality theorist. He said everybody's born with varying degrees of cooperation, persistence, harm avoidance, novelty seeking, reward dependence. But we're also born with some element of self-transcendence. This goes back to the Big Bang. The universe is biased towards greater complexity. Complex systems want to be more complex. Given an opportunity in a complex system, what happened. I don't want to go into too much detail about complexity theory, but that self-transcendence is that evolutionary impulse towards greater complexity that we all have. We all want to go farther, a step beyond. That's in all of us to some extent. Some of us have a lot of it, and we're the seekers. We just want to keep getting better at stuff. Some people have less of it. Everybody has some of it. And one way you can notice this, if you ever just want to have a visible manifestation in it, is go to any neighborhood in this country and just look at all the front yards. And you're going to see creative things done in every single front yard of that. Sometimes not. Sometimes sometimes the statement is, okay, fuck everybody. That's it. It's one of those. And interestingly, if you're one of those in a neighborhood, the rest of the people put pressure on you. Hey, look, fix it up, make it look nicer. You put some creativity into that front yard. We all have that drive to self-transcend, to create, to make something beautiful. It's just beautiful. It's another human superpower. Or many superpowers. In the Indian tradition, they call them cities. They call them superpowers. And we got a lot of them. And everybody has their own. And we also all have our vulnerabilities and our blind spots. Enter psychotherapy, training, so on. You find somebody who's in relationship with you, cares about you, wants you to grow. You can't tickle yourself. So there's some things you can't see yourself. And that person points them out.
Yeah.
Helps you grow. And that feels good. And then here we go. We're moving towards that. I'm happy to be who I am. And I'm always open to be better.
Yeah, working through those initial blind spots, I certainly found really challenging. And it really does take somebody else to guide you through that process.
It does.
And stop seeing them as a threat and continue to sort of develop and evolve in that regard. And I think it's so important to have that person, because then it becomes proactive work. Before there's a crisis, we can actually work on this stuff and become better at managing things ahead of the big blow up. And I guess there's both sides of it. This is one thing people could do proactively. What do we do after a mental health emergency? Or, how do we pick up the pieces and continue to evolve and grow?
Well, first of all, people will come to therapy either because there's something wrong, usually. And then as that gets better, or if they'll want to continue to grow. And both of those things are a lot of fun. I like helping people do both. I like helping people with persistent pain. I like or intrusive distress. And I like helping people grow. Both of those are great. The first thing that we do is we ask for help. There's no coincidence that the first step in AA of the 12 steps is, I've come to believe that I'm powerless and I need help. And then receiving help. And everybody in the program will tell you that's the hardest step. You do that, okay, things are going to go better after you do that first step. And so you ask for help. And then you get somebody who knows more about this area with you, in relationship with you. This intersubjectivity is super powerful. And that if that person is a therapist, the first thing that they're going to say is, one, you need to have 100% acceptance that this is happening, whatever this is. And two, you have 100% responsibility for dealing with it. If you're in a car wreck, you don't have 100% responsibility of that guy pulling out of nowhere and running into you. But after you're injured, after your leg gets crushed or whatever the hell happened, I have 100% responsibility dealing with that. Or in the relationship, if my lover leaves me and I'm devastated, and on and on and on. Or if I enter a major depression, some people are more prone to anxiety and depression. Yeah. Some people, 15 to 19% of the population, have personality disorders where they have practically no ability to self-observe themselves doing the same damn thing over and over and over again. These are not psychotics. These people look normal when they're doing the same thing when it works, and doesn't work, but you can't do it all the time. Like a paranoid person is a normal person in North Korea. They don't stand out. You should be a paranoid person. But you come to Santa Barbara, go to the beach. These people are out to steal my beach blanket. No, they're not. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So those people, I have a problem. I can't. Somebody says, look, you're really not noticing that these things you're doing are creating. And so you need to develop an observing ego. You need to develop different traits that you can go to other than whatever suspicion. And that takes a long time. It's a lot of work. And it's not fair that they have to do all that extra work. And somebody that isn't wired that way, these are genetically determined conditions.
Right.
It's not fair that somebody who's wired to have a great temperament doesn't have to do that work.
Yeah.
Life's not fair. So they got to have radical acceptance. Life's not fair. And my universe is dependent upon me, and I can get better at something. And sometimes I do it slower. Sometimes I do it quicker. But if you put the effort in and you receive influence and self-observe, learn how to self-observe, you can make progress.
Yeah. I've personally experienced all of the above, anxiety, depression, and just to acknowledge that it's easy for us to talk about that. It's so hard, like when you're in those moments, in a depressive state, the last thing you want to do almost is get out of it. Like it's almost like pulling you in to keep you there. And so, I think that's such an important acknowledgement that this is hard work, but the reward has just been unbelievable in really working through these states.
One of my blogs is, I'm sorry that I'm making this sound easy. The way that I got into this business was I was 15 years old having a psychotic depressive episode. And my parents wisely got us into therapy, who turned out to be a pretty good therapist, extraordinary for 1965. And they committed me. My dad said, hey, let's go look at sports cars. We were going to go look at sports cars. We stopped our 54 Ford in front of the Wells Neuropsychiatric Clinic, and there was a suitcase in back. And they locked me up and gave me 23 electroconvulsive treatments over the next 5 weeks.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. I'm kind of glad they did that instead of, they didn't have the meds at the time, because there is some evidence that electroconvulsive therapy creates neurogenesis. I'm just saying that. But it does work with depression. Yeah, look at the bright side. It does work with depression. In that hospital, when I wasn't depressed and distorted anymore, delusional anymore, I went, wait a minute, I don't want people to lock me up anymore. What do I want? And there's only two things in the world that attracted me in 1965. I don't like, by the way, I was not down with 1965 American culture by any stretch of imagination, Vietnam, whatever. Being a warrior and a healer. And the closest I could get to being a warrior and a healer was being a martial artist and being a psychotherapist. And so I got out of the hospital and started both of those things. 3.5 years later, I had a black belt, and 10 years later, I had my first license. Never looked back. But it came from basically a death and a rebirth.
Right.
My psychology was that Keith before died to a certain extent. And the new Keith that came out of that shamanic journey, which is what happens when kids do vision quests. They die and they're reborn. You're reborn into a new self. And then if that self decides on a direction, you go in that direction. And to this moment, to this day, I remember the pain of that psychotic depression. I remember my longing for death. I understand my suicidal clients. I understand. If you have borderline personality disorder, often borderline personality disorder will do a suicide attempt at age 37, plus or minus 7 years. Usually, and that's after 5 failed therapy attempts. They didn't get the right therapy, and they're just tired of feeling bad.
Yeah.
They're so sick of being unhappy and so sick of being explosive, and so there'll be a suicide. Consciousness is a great gift, but it's also a great burden. And if we're not happy, we have our obligation to ourselves and our universe and the people around us to grow.
Right. And so how do people find the right practitioner? Because that's a challenging thing for people, I think.
Yeah. It's interestingly, it's a hard question. First of all, any practitioner is better than none. Second of all, ask your friends, anybody or your doctor or somebody that you had a good experience with, and then go have a session or two with them. And if you feel like they understand you and can care for you and can help you, and if you feel that, keep seeing them. If you go, no, I don't think they get me, or they seem to be on my case, or not, then don't quit. Tell them. And I think that you really don't understand me. Now, if they're the right therapist, after that conversation, you'll feel a lot more understood. Somebody says, I don't think you're understanding me. I always 100% go to myself, I'm not understanding them. And I become eager. I go, tell me what I'm not understanding. And I'll just focus on it until I go, so do you feel understood now? And they'll go, okay, yeah, I do now. All right, good. Now we can move forward. I want them to know it is not okay with me for them to not feel understood. And it's also not okay for them to not feel cared about. And if that happens, that's much rarer, but if that happens, it's the same thing. So you find somebody, you talk to them. If there's understanding, it's good. If something feels weird, talk about it. And then if you feel more trusting of them after that talk, keep going. That gets a little trickier if you have a personality disorder. And no offense to everybody who has personality disorders. Nobody with personality disorder comes in and says, my problem is I have personality disorder. Right. Personality disorders just feel like me, Yeah. I can't trust people. What do you mean? I mean, people can't be trusted.
Yeah.
My problem is that, I'm anxious all the time because, there's so many people around, you can't trust them. And you go, well, I'll help you with your anxiety, but well, probably your attitude towards people needs to shift a little bit. No, I don't think so. Well, okay, we'll see. I mean, you see, that's a trickier work, but it's work that can be done with most people. Maybe not psychopaths, but pretty much everybody else.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point on the resonance and being able to have that conversation. Something I've always found valuable in any practitioner is just experience. Has the individual made their first 100 mistakes? I think I learned that from you, right? Like when we're hiring therapists at the sports teams, don't hire someone who hasn't made their first 100 mistakes to work on a $100 million athlete. And I think it's the same with your psychology. That's true. Well, I did my first session when I was 23. I did an okay job in retrospect, but I just plunged in. So now I've done 75,000 sessions. So I've had some experience. You've worked with some of the best athletes in the world. If you're in a profession of helping people grow, just that interest in wanting to grow yourself and helping people grow makes you effective. And you start whatever level you start and just do the best you can to get better at it. And it's growth mindset, the Carol Dweck stuff. Yeah. And so as we wrap up here, Keith, coming up to the hour, or I think actually slightly over, what are 3 takeaways for people, beginning this journey that they can start to work on and incorporate into their life?
Great. Well, let's start. One, are you happy with yourself in your life, and are the people around you happy with you? If that's the case, good job. You're in a groove. Now, remember, life is a series of processes. So recognize it's going to get harder at some point and go, okay, I knew that was going to happen. And now I need to learn from this and get wiser and stronger as a result of this harder stuff. And always look for ideas, practices, and stuff that are a little bit better than the ones I've got. If you're happy with yourself, people around you are happy, great. If you're not happy with yourself in your life, or the people around you are not happy with you, then find somebody, find a therapist, and go talk to them about it. Mm-hmm. And what that does is you enter that universe. You enter the universe of self-exploration, self-transformation. You enter that universe. In the teachings of Don Juan, the sorcerer Don Juan told Carlos Castaneda, there are 5 traps to a person of knowledge: fear, power, clarity, and old age and infirmity. Those 4. And in those are injunctions. Never let fear decide. Mm-hmm. And ask people for help. Power. Always assume that you might be making a mistake, and be aware of the world telling you, the universe telling you can do something better. Clarity. Never be so sure that you're not willing to consider another alternative. And old age and infirmity. Make sure you have a connection of wise people that you trust around you, that share your values, that can support you when you go down. Mm-hmm. That works pretty well. But it runs off of, we're never alone. We're always in a relationship, and if there's a problem, ask somebody that you respect and care about. Ask them for help, and then use that help. Receive it. Mm-hmm. Remember, self-awareness isn't enough. Yeah, it needs to be productive self-awareness where you take the stuff and embody it in some fashion.
Right, and I love the emphasis on relationship. It's been a common thread throughout this. Yes. We named one of our essentials of vitality, emotional, social, and spiritual connection.
Yes.
Because it's just, that is just such a cornerstone for me. And I really think that's come through as a common thread here. The books you mentioned earlier, Keith, we've got, most of them are sitting on the bookshelf, and they're absolutely amazing. Where can people go? You mentioned your website.
Go to my website, drkeithwitt.com, DrKeithWitt.com. Now, on my website, there's 10 of my books. 9 of them are free because I want people to have access to them. One of them, I only own half of the rights to it. Integral Life owns the other half. There are literally hundreds of videos and blogs that I've generated content over the last 25, 30 years. There it is. Mm-hmm. If you're somebody like me, particularly if you studied integral psychology, and I'm one of the people who write about integral psychology in the world, you have a cosmology that is a coherent cosmology about how to understand the world and how to move through it and how to heal people and all that other kind of stuff. That's one of the reasons when I teach therapists, I go, I don't want you to learn my system. I want to find out your natural healing style, and let's enhance it. Let's enhance your cosmology of healing. And so taking in that cosmology is presented in all that material. And I encourage people to go there and find the stuff that works for you and ignore the stuff that doesn't. We're all different. But if you go there, there'll be stuff that will be helpful. Yeah.
If there was one book you had to pick up for people who aren't familiar with yourself and integral, where would you start?
That's great. So I would read Integral Mindfulness first, which is kind of designed for people that aren't having a lot of problems. And then I'd read Trauma into Transcendence, which is designed for people who are dealing with trauma. Okay, so Those are those 2 bookends. If you have a relationship, I would recommend Loving Completely. Mm-hmm. And if you want to continue that inner journey of healing, Shadow Light. My book, Shadow Light, was a revisiting of the concept of shadow that Carl Jung popularized. And most people see shadow as negative. Basically, our entire adaptive unconscious is our shadow self that is always giving us constructive and destructive stuff. And how we manage that really depends on how we grow. The Shadow Light book and the Shadow Light workbook, which is a series of exercises, takes you into all that stuff in a variety of dimensions, up to the spiritual. When you're developing, the higher you go on any developmental line, say the self line or the psychosexual line, or, the integration of defenses. These are all lines of development that we grow on. The higher you go on those lines, the more of a connection you feel with spirit. It's not theoretical. Right now, I don't feel like it's just Keith talking. Something else coming through me that's there all the time when I work. Well, that's what happens when you develop. You start having more and more stable sense of connected to all that mystery that's around us, but there's an intelligence there and there's love there. And if you open to it, it comes through you to other people. And that's beautiful.
Yeah. And well, it certainly comes across in your work, Keith, and it's come across today. So I can't thank you enough again for spending the time with us and sharing with us today. And would love to have you back on to dive deeper into some of these topics.
Oh yeah, just pick one and I will jump aboard. I really enjoy these conversations. And by the way, thanks for doing Vitality Collective. Thanks for bringing this into the world. The world needs this. All of us now are holistic. All of us now are multimodal. All of us now are cross-paradigmatic. We just have different emphasis. And the Vitality Collective emphasis, the longevity emphasis, with the breadth of knowledge that you have. This is a new thing in the world. I hope people understand how special this is.
Yeah, we hope so too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. That's so kind of you to say. And we'll really look forward to our next chat.
Great.
Thank you, Keith.
You're welcome.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Vitality Collective podcast. As we wrap up, let's revisit 3 powerful takeaways shared by Dr. Witt. Number 1, self-reflection. Ask yourself, am I happy with myself in my life? Are the people around me happy with me? If the answer is no, use this as an opportunity to seek growth and improvement. Number 2, embrace hardship as growth. Life will inevitably present challenges. Instead of resisting them, see these moments as opportunities to learn, grow, and emerge wiser and stronger. And number 3, seek guidance and support. When facing difficulties or feeling stuck, don't hesitate to ask for help. Find the right therapist or guide who can open the door to self-exploration and transformation. We hope these insights inspire you to take the next step towards a vibrant and connected self. For more information from Dr. Witt, visit drkeithwitt.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Vitality Collective podcast.